right. So hello everybody. Thank you for coming out on this fine day. This is Commonweal's new school, and so just one question. Is there anybody who's never been out here before to Commonweal? Somehow I thought so. Okay, so you know who we are in a sense. Been around for over 40 years, health and environmental institute with a broad range of programs and efforts, and one of them for the last almost dozen years has been the New School, which hosts all kinds of talks on all kinds of topics. And today we're talking basically about books. I thought maybe I should have just titled it Bookworm or something like that. But before we get started, I just want to point out that there is a companion website for the New School that has podcasts and recordings of most of our previous ones. There's now, a couple hundred on there. Amazing variety that you can listen to, and the ones over the last couple of years at least have been videoed as well. So after today, the next one set is January 12th. It's Beatrice Chestnut about the Enneagram panels, something that our founder, Michael Lerner, is very into, and me being a trained skeptic about this kind of thing, I wasn't into it, but I did come to one of the seminars about it a couple years ago, and I was really kind of amazed about it. So that is on going for 4 different times: January 12th, February 9th, February 24th. You can find out about that on the site. And January 25th, Sunya Schwag, MD, a functional medicine approach to chronic illness and Lyme disease. We have a long tradition in these talks of doing talks about medicine and healthcare and end-of-life issues as well. So you can sign up on our mailing list, which is out here, to make sure if you're not already. And these talks are free, but done by donation. Just anything you might help out just to keep the program going as well would be most welcome. So today, books. Our guests today, Steve and Molly, are the owners of Point Reyes Books in Point Reyes Station for now almost just under 2 years. Mm-hmm. And the bookstore was around a long time before that. In my ancient memory, it was called the Brown Bookstore, Brown Study. And it was kind of dark and scary in there, and then smelled like my attic. And it was fine, but then it was taken over by another couple named Steve and Kate, who ran it for quite a few years and did a great job here today, and then decided to move on, and now the new owners are here. So I think, as a lifelong bookworm, that it's brave to take on a bookstore in this day and age, judging from everything you hear and read about the future of reading and books. But they have done it, and they have done it so far with a really great response and success. So much so that, is there any truth to the rumor that it's going to turn into an all-kids bookstore in January?
No, I think we will particularly need, our grown-up books around
right.
us, as our home becomes more of a kid's home.
Yeah, they're going to become parents just next month. So congratulations on that. So tell me, let's talk about you guys first, because we'll get into a lot about the bookstore, but you're both veterans of the book world and reading and working in various aspects of that. What was you can both take it in any order, what was your first experience of getting excited, getting turned on to reading? What were you reading then as a youngster? First favorite book, first love, basically.
Well, reading has been a part of my life for a part of all of my memories, so it is actually really hard for me to pinpoint that moment. I do know that the first chapter book that I read by myself, which was something I took great pride in at the time, was Charlotte's Web. And that was something I was really determined, because I grew up in a house with a lot of books, and my parents read a lot, and I really wanted that experience of kind of curling up with a good long book and reading it by myself, and that one meant a lot to me. And it's an incredible story that stuck with me. So I don't know if that's, I think I was already hooked by then and kind of fixated on making reading part of my life.
At like what age
It's
is
an early
that?
memory.
About?
I think I was 6 when I read that
Right.
book. Yeah.
Yeah.
6
How
or
about
7.
you? He's going to say Dostoevsky or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think when I was in kindergarten, there was like a contest to read the most, Dr. Seuss and those kind of P.D. Eastman books, and I really liked the competition aspect of it, so I read all of those books. And I think that's what did it. It's like, oh, you can get candy for this? And so, yeah, here we are.
So when you went on into more school, did you guys
Yeah.
study, major in literature or books, English, that kind of stuff?
I did, definitely. I think reading and writing remained kind of passions throughout all of my education. I didn't go into college actually thinking necessarily that I would study writing and literature, but as I started signing up for courses, it was what I was most drawn to. And I went to UC San Diego, which is mostly a pretty engineering and sciences focused institution, but actually had this incredible literature and writing department that was run in a pretty experimental and unique way. And because it was such a science-heavy school, it was actually a really unique, tight-knit community too. So I kind of got this incredible education and experience through that that opened me up to a lot of works that were published by small presses, even though that wasn't something I was really following at the time, or by sort of lesser known writers, and that was really exciting for me.
Yeah. Same for me. When I went into college, I thought I was going to be a biology major, and then I thought anthropology, and then when I was a junior, I realized the most classes I'd taken were in English literature and philosophy, and so I just kind of focused on a degree that I thought could be applied in any situation, and then I ended up working in a bookstore in college, and here I am now.
Started there and never
Started
stopped.
there, and yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And where was that?
in New Jersey. I grew up in South
Yeah, yeah.
Jersey, so yeah, and I went
And
to a state school in outside of Atlantic City.
So you came to San Francisco, and you worked at Green Apple.
About 10 years, yeah. I moved to San Francisco in 2007, kind of sight unseen, just like did it. Didn't even think about, and I got a job at Green Apple my first day in the city. Was there for almost 10 years. Left in the middle to work for a small publisher in Illinois. Realized I didn't want to be in Illinois because who would want to be in Southern Illinois? And then came back out here, and that's when I met Molly at Green Apple, actually.
Right.
I was taking her job. She had quit.
That's true.
Yeah, Molly had quit, or given her notice, and then kind of like a job fell through, and Pete, one of the owners there, realized that he shouldn't get rid of Molly and he should keep her around. So I was coming back to assume my old position, which Molly had had. It worked out well for me.
For me too.
So you started there in the interim. Did you come right out of school too and work in bookstores?
It was I was a few years out of school at that point, and I kind of working in a bookstore definitely had been some version of a dream I'd had, but it wasn't really, I don't think I knew until I really had been working at Green Apple for a little while what a world of possibility bookselling actually opens up. I had been, I was looking for a job, and if I was going to sell anything, selling books made the most sense. But the idea of the connection to the publishing industry and the community that booksellers have amongst each other, and just all of the sort of possibilities that being in a bookstore opens up were not really on my radar when I dropped off my resume at Green Apple. I thought I'd get to spend a lot of time around books and move on to the next thing when it came along. So
Yeah, astrophysics or something like that.
changed my life in a much bigger, and then I would launch my career as an astrophysicist. But yeah, I didn't see it as a launch pad for kind of the rest of my life the way it has been.
For those who don't know, Green Apple is a famous bookstore in San Francisco. It's very large, established, and does both new and used, and has basically all kinds plus music. So it is quite a community and a busy place, a great store. So you're both there for some time now. When you left Green Apple, you stayed in the publishing and book world in a way. So can you say a little bit about what you've been doing since then?
Yeah, and
still
so
do.
I left Green Apple to work at 826 Valencia, which is an organization that I had previously been a volunteer at in San Francisco. It's a nonprofit writing and tutoring organization. We have, at the time, it was just one center on Valencia Street. Our name is our street address, and now we've opened a second writing and tutoring center in the Tenderloin neighborhood, and there's a third coming to the Mission Bay neighborhood in San Francisco early next year. And we also do work in local schools. So the mission of the organization is to support under-resourced students with their writing skills and help teachers inspire their students to write. So we do a lot of different kinds of writing support, from creative writing to helping with college applications to tutoring on any number of big publishing projects. We also publish our students' work. And we served over 8,000 students last year in San Francisco. And it's a really special place. It's a really creative approach to what is also really, really valuable and needed academic support, and a space for kind of a third place for some of our students to come that's not school and not home, and where they can get the one-on-one support of a volunteer with what is often the very scary task of writing and editing.
So you've been doing that, and you were working still at bookstores. So where did this, do you remember this germ of an idea that you wanted to own your own store? How did that come up? I was just thinking, I know many people have worked in bookstores, including myself. People go either way. They learn to hate it and don't want to even read anything anymore, and they never go away, or they really stay in it in some ways. And you guys have ramped it up. How did you decide you wanted to own your own?
Well, deciding that we wanted to own our own, we often daydreamed, and I joke with Steve about this. We daydreamed about Point Reyes Books as sort of a far off thing, like. I joke, I don't know how much of a joke it is, but Molly works at a nonprofit and I was working at a no-profit, a bookstore. So we had no way to actually own a bookstore. And then we can talk about how we did that. But I think, like Molly, I was very invested in Green Apple. I love the community, both the community there and the larger publishing community and bookselling community at large. I got very involved in other various things, and I feel like we dug in, this is something that we really love, and I think we talked about it a lot, and we both of us care a lot about space, physical space, and how it kind of manifests and what can happen in those spaces. And for me, outside of the home, that space, the one I find the most engaging to be in, not even just a bookstore that we own, but any bookstore that you go into, because it's this kind of infinite realm of ideas and imagination, and so of course we visit every bookstore that we come across, but I think maybe as a kid we didn't have a bookstore in my town, in the area in southern New Jersey that I grew up. There was no bookstore for 3 counties, so I remember the first time when there are these book deserts throughout the country, and so the first time I went into a real bookstore as a kid, I just couldn't believe that I was a reader, and we would use the library a lot. But I couldn't believe this range of, and I think that's just stuck with me in some ways. Yeah.
And Stephen, I was working at 826, but then Stephen had the opportunity to open and run Green Apple's second store, Green Apple Books on the Park, which was right down the street from our apartment at the time. And through that experience, we were there. It was a bookstore coming into a new space, and so it was the smell of raw wood in the bookshelves and filling all the shelves for the first time, starting with A. And I got to hang around for a lot of that, and I think that experience was really special in kind of seeing what creating something new could feel like. And we met, through that store and the events that happened there, and the people who came by, and the time we were spending in that neighborhood, we met people who are lifelong friends now and formed community that there are people who someone will ask, oh, how do you know so and so? And the answer is, we met in the bookstore. I don't remember how it happened. It was an event. It was a reading. Everyone went around the corner for a drink afterwards, and here we are. They're some of the closest people to us in the world. So there's something really special there that I think also gave us that sense of like, what if we had a space like this that was our own?
Yeah. It's also great validation. It's not every retail business that people come in every day and say like, my God, a bookstore, what a place. You get this constant validation, which is great, But just knowing that and seeing that space beyond ourselves, it matters to people, I think, is another thing that you don't get that at the Gap, or where, I mean, maybe someone comes in and said, this is my favorite Gap, but I feel like with a bookstore,
Well, when I first came to San Francisco, I was told Green Apple was a great pickup joint. You could go in there and people who actually read stuff instead of just drunk, So it was
I
great.
mean,
There was plenty of drunk, too.
and look what happens here.
Yeah, proof.
Be careful.
So when did you learn that Point Reyes Books might be available?
I think we actually learned a little earlier than some people, but through sales reps. That's the other side of the business that my job at Green Apple, among other jobs, I was one of the new book buyers, so I would meet with sales reps and decide which new books we're going to stock in the store, which is fun to kind of shape an inventory that way and to think like, I don't know, it keeps you very curious, I think. But we found out because a sales rep had visited Point Reyes and was taking a friend of ours who works for a publisher in Minneapolis around, and we had dinner with him that night, and she just happened to say like, oh, I think Kate and Steve are going to decide to sell the store. And I kind of had this moment of like, I was like, oh, well, that was a daydream that we had. That was, but...
Right. We kind of thought that meant like, there goes our chance at ever sort of sneaking our way into Point Reyes Books.
No plan. There was no plan about how we would do that.
Yeah.
But then, and so we got in touch and,
well, then we learned about the incredibly thoughtful way that Kate and Steve were doing this process, that they were actually seeking letters of interest and why people were interested in taking over the store. And we thought, well, we can write a letter. That's something we can do.
And so, when we sent them our proposal and they, read that along with, I don't know, close to 30 others maybe. And so we got to know Kate and Steve, who we had met before just through the, the book world in the Bay Area, as a very strong, kind of tightly knit community. And kind of made it through successive meetings and got to the point where they said, we'd love to sell it to you. And we were like, great. We don't have money. So, like...
Because we've been working in bookstores for our whole careers.
But it became clear you were the right people, so, and it happened.
Yeah, through an incredible network of support.
So they ran it all those years and turned it into what I was always calling the Paris of Point Reyes Station. It's this community center, this kind of cultural center with events and all this great stuff. And clearly you guys have tried to keep that going. So beyond just selling physical books, it's another broader kind of mission that you do. Do you want to say something about that in terms of the programming and such that you do?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say the nicest thing, maybe not the nicest thing, but one of the great things is that beyond like us coming to the bookstore, we didn't feel, I mean, we want to do right by the store, of course, and do right by the town and all of these things, but we didn't feel like that Steve and Kate were kind of breathing down our necks and like, you need to do what we did and follow our lead, we have like total independence to kind of see things through the way that we think they should go, and that's been very gratifying. And that, Black Mountain Circle being what Steve is doing now, fills this other role, and we kind of think like, okay, like where is there an opening? What are things that we would like to do that we think will resonate? And of course we hope that they have. But yeah, events and, so were you gonna?
Well, I think one thing that we sort of brought to our experience with and kind of philosophy of what bookstores are and can be is, there's this kind of stereotype that is a stereotype for a reason. You describe the previous versions of the store as being kind of maybe dusty and unwelcoming when it was the Brown Study, or that kind of like a bookstore where doesn't really feel like people are welcome and the owner just wants to sit and read and that's a real thing. But also, people will kind of ask, oh, do you get a lot of reading done? And the answer is no, first of all, because we're running a business, and then it's also because the reason we love being in bookstores is because of the community spaces they are and the conversations that happen there. We do a lot of reading on our own, and that's the alone private part of it, but the time in the bookstore is a time for interaction and conversation and making the world bigger, not shrinking it down to one person with a book. So that was something that I think I know we shared with Steve and Kate. I think the first time we had that conversation, there was such a deep resonance in kind of our philosophies of what the space could and should be.
Mm-hmm. And are you happy so far with how it's going? You're doing well, right? I mean, it's for a bookstore.
Yeah. The
right.
qualifier is important. No, the last couple of... It's hard to believe it's coming up on 2 years, and January 1st will be our second anniversary at the store. And I mean, we're not like numbers people, so we poured over all the numbers when we were like dreaming, kind of plotting out our business plan and what we thought we could do in the store. And it's a profitable bookstore. The average, the American Booksellers Association has a thing called Abacus, which many independent bookstores, members of the ABA, submit their numbers each year. And on average, an average bookstore's profit is like 2% profit. And that's, our discounts aren't great. All these various things, but when we looked at the numbers here, like overhead's pretty low. It's the being open 10 to 6 is great, There are a variety of factors went into that, and you look and, it's a profitable store, and, we never dreamed of making a lot of money. And so, because we do it for other reasons, I think, which are the true reasons for staying in books, for that community, and because we're suckers and we like books, like free books, of course, who needs money?
The new candy, right?
It's the new candy,
Right. I mean, that was why I was a book critic for all those years for the Chronicle.
That's another way to get free books.
Stuff.
Yeah, you mentioned it being brave, and I think we went into it, it definitely felt like a brave leap for us in our lives for a lot of reasons. But we actually were able to feel very confident in kind of the viability of the bookstore, both because it was such a beloved and cherished and well-run bookstore to begin with, and so we just felt incredibly lucky to be stepping into that, and because I think we already didn't really buy into the kind of doom and gloom about bookstores. We'd already kind of seen that bookstores are dead and long live bookstores.
Well, that was my next question around that. So I mean, that's what I meant by brave, is that the countervailing winds basically are at least two things. One is that people don't read anymore, particularly young people, and the second is that bookstores have been declining, independent bookstores in particular, but even the big chains are going down. And I think you have counterfactual information to that now. But I mean, that was what you were stepping into, and I was impressed in meeting with you about it that you did seem confident in that way. So you knew something that I didn't at that point. But I mean, this is so I mean, here's Harper's from last month, the printed word in peril. I mean, so there's endless media and press about this, is that people aren't buying books and reading them, and that bookstores are dying out. So.
I will say that was written by a novelist whose books don't sell very well.
Touche.
I know.
It's all right.
There goes that event possibility. We're never gonna.
If you watch this,
Yeah, actually, the number of independent bookstores over the last 5 to 10 years has increased 40% or something. I think as the bigger chains have problems, Barnes & Noble is continually having problems and may not be around, in the next 5 years. Borders going under. My first bookstore job was at a Borders while I was in college. I think those large chains, like their overhead is, there's just, you can't make that kind of money. But I think small, well-run businesses that keep an eye on the bottom line and kind of are nimble and are in touch with their community and the people who are in the community. Whereas a store like Barnes & Noble is so centralized, like all the buying happens in one place in a corporate headquarters and then gets disseminated. But that might not answer to what your community is, and I think that's really hard in any business, let alone books. I think a braver thing to do, we have plenty of friends who have opened a bookstore in a place that didn't have a bookstore. To me, that is a brave thing to do. You have no sense of what your foot traffic will be, quite who your audience is. And I think some of those stores will have a harder time going. But the fact that we came into an established bookstore that was very beloved, that people all over the world know, felt like, wow, could it really be this easy to just come into this place of all places? We have friends in Providence, Rhode Island, who opened a bookstore, and they're going through their kind of, I guess they're a year in now, but they're kind of trying to find their footing. They're trying to figure out what their kind of niche is in town and where they are. But I mean, I think they're doing well. But I think they're the kind of problems that we didn't have, because we know how many people in a day will come into that store. You can look at the numbers. The great thing about buying a bookstore that's been around for that long is you can look back at 15 years of reports and see how many transactions happened on a Wednesday in November in 2002. So kind of historically, like having all that at our disposal is really helpful.
And we're in such a special place that all of us feel it right now, right? That like this is an amazing little corner of the world, that we know that we really benefit, not just geographically from being a beautiful place people want to come to, but I think when people step into the bookstore, they have a feeling like, I want to bring some part of this home with me. I want to remember my time in Point Reyes. And that's the people who are visiting. For the local community, a lot of great readers.
Writers.
Writers that we're just fortunate to be among. So there's some special ingredients converging at this western edge, to borrow the phrase from the name of the talk.
So what's your thoughts on the online issue? I mean, is Amazon the bogeyman here? I mean, this has been what many people have blamed the threat to bookstores on.
I think we're actually reaching a point. I think we were hitting a tipping point where more and more people, there was kind of pushback this year that I noticed online, a few pieces that I read about people deleting their Prime accounts and things. And it makes sense in various parts of the country where you don't have access to, and just to use books as the example, since that's what we're talking about, but if you don't have access to a bookstore, then where else would you go, right? But I think, we're in a highly educated area where like the shop local movement is very strong, and I think people realize the value of that. A bookstore in a town is a very important thing, and so Amazon is too big to, like, we can't, like, I always joke that I kind of hope like we're like the little critter on the forest floor and Amazon just never sees us, That's how we can survive, because we are small and we can be nimble. The publishing industry and the kind of distribution has gotten a lot better. I think publishers realize as all those big stores were closing that, we have all these independent bookstores that we should be serving better. So we get books faster, we get better discounts, those sorts of things are kind of coming around. And it feels like it's kind of turning a corner. Amazon is always going to take up such a big part of the market, but I do think there's some pushback happening.
Right.
Yeah.
How about online?
I worry more about Amazon's ubiquity in other areas than in books at this point, honestly. I think, we hear, it's a self-selecting audience, obviously, but we hear in the store all the time people coming in and saying, it just feels so good to be in a real bookstore, and I really want to hold this book in my hand, and I tried the Kindle and it didn't work for me. And so I think people have really come to identify what they value about bookstores and what they value about real books, and will seek it out if that's something that they want. I'm not sure the same thing is happening for like where you go to buy your paper towels, and more and more of that kind of stuff is being ordered in bulk through Amazon. So in some ways, when I make my kind of anti-Amazon argument with people, I actually try to keep books out of it, because I think that it's taking over in a lot of other ways, and small independent bookstores have found their niche, and other local businesses that we count on might not have, and considering the implications of that, I think, is really important.
I was thinking kind of the analogy with music, because there's been this, physical music, first vinyl records, and then CD went down, and it's kind of come back up again, it seems, too. People don't want to just stream stuff for whatever reason. They want to actually have something.
Yeah, vinyl sells better now than any other format of music, I think,
Right.
And because of that physical object, it feels substantial and beautiful, and you can kind of hold it and cherish it. And I don't think people don't feel that way about CDs the same way, because they weren't kind of constructed to be right.
Yeah. I think the tangibility of it is something that's important, and the same thing with books, that there is something you can hold to as more and more of our lives becomes kind of etherized. All of the stuff that just exists in the air. That if you can have this thing that you love and that you want to spend time with, that it matters. That it really does matter.
What about the Kindle and the online book? It seemed, I read it, it's been a while for me, that plateaued too and went down.
Ebooks kind of like had this, and all these publishers are super excited about it, because in some ways it's cheaper. It's cheaper to produce, and they make more money, and they can sell it for the same amount as a book. But I think it's plateaued, and maybe even like the ebook sales have kind of plateaued or fallen slightly in the last few years. I think part of that is the technology just isn't there, and I do think there is something about like who's reading, and the fact that I'm sure the numbers say otherwise, but even at Green Apple and in the store here in Point Reyes, like we noticed, I don't know, maybe 40% to half of our customers are under 40. I think people who are, I think there's kind of this misconception that people under 40 aren't reading, but a lot of these people spend all day in front of a screen, like many of us, and they don't want to pick up a glowing screen to read. And again, it's a self-selecting audience, but we see the great thing about being in Point Reyes is that you see people from all over the world, Bay Area and beyond, that it's like a very interesting sampling of people who are coming in.
I did see a report recently that actually some of, I don't know if it was the dreaded millennials or whatever, but that they're actually reading more than other cohorts now, which surprised me really, because the stereotype is that they don't. But that I've heard that they're actually buying and reading more books than some of the older cohorts.
That's definitely our anecdotal experience.
It is interesting. I mean, I didn't expect that really, in a sense, but we all have stereotypes, right? So the store itself, since it's not going to be an all-kids bookstore, you have a very broad...
We have a great kids section.
I know.
That will only get better.
Yeah.
Certain of that.
They'll all be a little chewed on.
Right. Better and more beat up.
But do you have, so as far as inventory and scope, I mean, you've got a full service, a lot of things in there. Is there you characterize in a certain way that there's particular interest for you that you really specialize in or feel stronger in or more interested in?
My hope is that our nature and environmental writings section I want it to be like the best in the country. There's not a lot of bookstores that stock a good, environmental writing, both sort of critical, theoretical, scholarly stuff, but then also natural histories and things. We've really we've expanded those sections a lot, and guidebooks. That's just like a hobby of mine. So I love having a well-stocked guidebook section. Literary fiction, poetry, and we care a lot about poetry, and probably only one of the only sections we actually moved in the store. We moved poetry up to the front. And there was actually one day pretty early on we moved it up, and there was a round table that was a display, and we moved that kind of toward the front. And I watched a woman, people were coming in when we first took over to kind of suss it out and see what we were all about. And she did a circle through the store, and she said, "You got rid of the poetry section." I said, "Oh, no, we moved it to the front there." And I could just see, she was like, "Okay, you've passed the test."
Good.
So for me, those two sections in particular, but we do my experience at Green Apple was as a generalist bookstore, a big generalist bookstore, is that you want to represent, especially, and moving from there, that store was thousands of square feet. Now then there were 2 locations that I was doing for both, and I was a little worried when we went into a 1,200 square foot store. Like, how do you, like, I'm used to ordering so many books, and I realized that the store is kind of the ideal size to, you just get the best books, and you put them out, and you hope people find them. And there's something about that space that I think is very conducive to that. There's just like some magic that happens there. And so, but across, all sections, all categories. And
someone said to me once, after browsing the store for a little while, the way the books are arranged and the way the shelves are arranged, it's so easy to browse and it feels so intuitive. And it was funny because we had kind of just taken down a whole bunch of the section signs to repair them. And they were telling me, oh, it's so easy to find all the different sections I'm looking for. And I thought, it's funny you should say that at a time when they're not labeled. Like, what a strange. But there is this kind of, one of our employees, Lisa, who's been with the store for since long before we were, does like to talk about putting books next to each other that sing to each other. And I think the store is a nice size for that kind of singing to happen. We try to also keep it well organized and navigable and in alphabetical order, but
Makes sense. Do you have any, so customers, you've got regulars, I'm sure, from local and otherwise, and have you met new people in that? It's a you're getting that same kind of cultural feeling you were mentioning at Green Apple there, right?
It's even more, it's broader for sure, but you have the conversations we have there. I think a bookstore in the city that is a neighborhood bookstore, people are running errands and they have to come in and pick up this book or something. And because of the locations of Green Apple, you get some tourists because the store's been there for 50 years and it's near Golden Gate Park, but the store on Clement it's like a department store, and my job was a lot behind the scenes, and you're always running around, and there's always plenty to do. Which isn't to say there's not here, but I think like standing behind the counter, that you just have these incredible conversations on a daily basis about people who are coming from all over the world again, and I think people are surprised to find a good bookstore in a small town. I think there's, which is always kind of nice to surprise people in a good way.
Right. Next to a nice bakery.
Next to a nice bakery, yeah.
What's not to like?
And so those conversations happen a lot, and are as Molly said, like that's kind of one of the major rewards of the job. So you get to talk to people, and you have these kind of coincidental conversations and things that kind of spark ideas and.
So tell us a little bit about how it works. You were talking about reps coming in. So when you're in terms of buying, deciding what's there, do you have a steady flow, certainly of information, of emails and everything about catalogs from various publishers, and then you just pick and choose, or is that,
Yeah, so I've been a buyer for, I guess, 10 years, starting at Green Apple, but we see Paul Yamazaki, who's the buyer at City Lights, who's been there for close to 50 years now, is a good friend, and we kind of like one afternoon we spent some time looking. We decided that we probably see 85 to 90,000 titles a year, and that's like a tip of the iceberg of what's published every year. There's self-published books, and it's in the millions. But what we see presented from publishers and catalogs, either a paper catalog or increasingly online, and you can kind of immediately that 90% of some catalog isn't going to be for you. But then there are some gems in there that your sales rep might tell you something about. Some publicity that's lined up, or if it's some kind of cultural figure who you just don't know, they can direct you in that way, or tell you information that you don't have. But a lot of it's just kind of intuitive, or you get a sense of what your customers or your and a lot of it's just like personal curiosity. I think we take risks on books that sometimes work, sometimes don't. But
so how does it work in the business? So if you order a bunch of stuff you don't sell, what happens with that? Do you eventually mark it down? Can you send stuff back?
We're lucky to be able to send things back. There are, we just seasonally, we kind of do returns seasonally. We don't do a ton there. And in a bigger bookstore where you're buying more, you're inevitably going to return more. And there are all sorts of guidelines as to what percentage ideally that should be. Every store has a different philosophy. at Green Apple, it was very much like, well, if you're not doing returns, you're not taking risks, and so you would be constantly doing returns, which I don't, like personally, I'm not sure that's the case, because we want to be mindful of our carbon footprint, and you don't want to just constantly be sending things out into the world and UPS or FedEx coming to pick up. So we're conservative, I think, in quantity of books, but not in the breadth. I think like we might do 3 of something as opposed to 10, and then see how those three go. And as I said earlier, like our distribution channels are getting better, so it's easier to get things back in more quickly.
And publishers are the ones that also approach you with, hey, we have an author who might want to come and read, and all
some
of
of
that,
that
or do you
happens.
set up some of your own?
We set up some of our own. We have a really good community, and we know a lot of writers, and who doesn't want to come to Point Reyes for a week? Yeah. Especially people who are doing their tours, who are at LA, maybe Santa Cruz, San Francisco, then they're going on to Portland and Seattle. It's just like, take a night and come to Point Reyes for the or for a weekend. And we've had a couple of writers come for a night and then stay for a week. You can't get rid of them, which is really great. I mean, that's great. Because there is kind of an uphill battle with publishers, because they're thinking like, what is this tiny store in a community of 800 people? Why did we send someone there? But then I think once they realize what is possible here, some of the events over the years, I mean, that Kate and Steve started, and then that we've kind of continued. You can get 300 people for the right writer, or you get 70 people in the store. You get 20 people in the store, and it ends up being a really special night. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So books itself, you've brought some show and tell thing like that.
We bring them everywhere.
Of course. No, we were looking, I mean, this car was like my own car. I mean, it's basically a mobile library of molding stuff, especially when it's...
We recently bought a 1992 Volvo station wagon, and I use it more often, and it is starting to get filled with books that we walked out to get a couple of boxes, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I've ever opened the door with someone standing there next to me.
Well, no, when I do mine,
it's seat back pockets.
Got deep,
one of the perks of
stuff
those
falls out.
wagons.
Yeah, that's the same, Well, let's say just in terms of your business so far, have there been any particular titles that just continual good sellers for you? That you.
Yeah, actually, last winter, maybe many of you probably know this book, The California Field Atlas. This book, do you know this book? So Obi Kaufman, his name is Obi Kaufman, did this book. It's watercolors, and it's a field atlas, basically all of California. It's kind of an art book.
Is that Heyday?
Heyday did this, yeah.
We had Malcolm did a talk here once, Malcolm Margolin, the founder of Heyday. Yeah.
This book last year around this time, I think we were the last bookstore to have stock, because this was a book that I was very aggressive on. I thought, like, if any store is going to sell this, it'll be us. And one of the models that Heyday did a consignment model, so I could order 100 copies from them and not pay until we sell them, which was a very unique thing that Malcolm started. But so we jumped on it, and everyone sold out, and they had to reprint. They had to reprint in China, so it had to come over on a boat. Then there was a strike at the docks, and so they couldn't get the books. But we've sold 500 copies of this book in a year, which is an incredible thing. Yeah.
We could use this to mention also actually that one thing we added in the last year is that we have an online store. You can search our website and order books online, both books we have in the store and anything that we can get from our distributor that we can send. And the kind of wild thing that happened with this book at this time last year was that since we were one of the only bookstores around that still had it, we were getting these orders from New York and Hawaii and like all over. And
it was kind of fun to
we
send
couldn't
them
figure
all
out how everyone found us, but we're very excited about it. But we also ship to Bolinas.
I'll drive down. I'll
Put it in the Volvo.
Yeah, put it in the Volvo. Add it to the file.
What else? Another nature one here. It looks like.
Some other books. One of our best sellers this year is a book that's 50 years old called The Peregrine by J.A. Baker, British writer. Amazing book. I mean, an obsessive book about a guy following hawks. And it's very much just that. It's written as a diary. I think it actually took him, it covers 10 years, but he wrote it, and then you read it as if it's all in the same 6 months or something.
There's some really well-written blurbs on the first page.
So I have I'm kind of obsessed with this book, and we sell a lot of this book. It's a great cover. I mean, it's hard to like resist that, the simplicity of it. But I have a friend who works, New York Review of Books does a lot of reprints of classics. They bring a lot of things that are out of print back into print. And I wrote about this as I sort of tend to do for a website that was just sort of like, what 5 books are you reading? And I did that. So a friend who, I wouldn't have mentioned this, but I knew you were going to say something. So the blurb, she put something that I wrote about it on the blurb page with like Werner Herzog and Helen MacDonald and Robert McFarlane. And so I was like, oh, this is my peak. I'm done. I don't ever need to do any other book selling again. But it's an amazing book, and we've done like a book club for it. It's just one of those kind of things you can kind of dip. It's very lyrical writing, and you can kind of dip in and out. And the fact that it is written as a diary, like sometimes I'll just open up and see if that day is in here and read a passage. And this was written kind of, I think, in '67, so it was like during the height of the kind of the DDT. It seemed like hawks weren't going to be around for much longer. Thankfully, they are. But I think there's this elegiac sense to it, that and the author at the time, I think, was undergoing some kind of an illness that's never referred to in the book. It's referred to in the introduction, but there's a kind of a sense of loss, but also this sense of like what the natural world can provide us, and how both how distinct it is from us, but also how enmeshed we are in it. It's a beautiful book.
Well, I saw McFarlane here, so he's a famous writer about walking around and traveling. He walked all around the United Kingdom. He wrote a book, and then Herzog, there was a book. So I was just reminded of a couple years ago. You guys were part of a book club, as it were, that was meeting down on the bay, and the theme seemed to be walking or traveling like that. Yeah. And there was a book of Werner Herzog, filmmaker, about walking.
Walking in ice.
Halfway across Europe and everything. And so here I was, a 20-year book critic for the Chronicle, and I sat down with these folks and their friends, and they dug into this book, and I didn't even understand what you guys were talking about. They were like, they were really into it. The detail, I was like, oh, I thought it was a book about a walk, but then it got really, it was really impressive. They were really serious about what this book meant to them, and all you people. It was really great. Is that still going on? Do you do that at all? No.
We have, in various iterations, but not that whole group again. But that book it's still in print, actually. The filmmaker Werner Herzog, who's a very it's amazing. He's a very particular individual, but he had a friend. He was somewhere in Germany, I forget where exactly, but he had a friend, a filmmaker, a critic who was in the hospital in Paris, and he, in the Herzogian way, thought that if he walked to her, she wouldn't die. And so he breaks into these cabins along the way in the mountains, and it's icy and
winter.
Yeah, it's winter. And then he says, like, well, I should make a detour and see where Joan of Arc is buried, in February or something. And he finally gets to Paris, and his friend survived. So you can't say it wasn't because of his walk,
It took him months.
It took him months,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, he's a big fan of the book. He did a thing down at Stanford with Robert Pogue Harrison about the Peregrine. It's one of his favorites. And Molly, you have a couple here. I'm going to give you...
Are we talking about recent favorites or
any
long-time favorites? Or
both.
Well, we were talking about events, and this was one of our favorite events of the last year. Michael and Dattier had already had a relationship with the bookstore and with Steve and Kate, and had done readings and events there before, which we felt when we learned that, we were really excited because he's one of our favorite writers, and to kind of already have that foundation of a relationship was really exciting.
And the first time he came into the store, we both kind of just got a little stream. Like, you know who that is, right?
And so he, this novel, Warlight, is the latest from him, and he came and did a reading and conversation at Toby's Feed Barn. We had the place packed, everyone, sitting on hay bales, as you do at Toby's. And it was a really special night. And it's a beautiful novel, as his always are. I think I am really drawn to prose by poets, which all of his work is. And it's a pretty spellbinding story that it's kind of hard to describe without spoilers, and I don't want to kind of give those, but it's basically it kind of starts with these young children who are kind of going through a tumultuous time where their parents have left on kind of a mysterious mission, and it goes through time and follows them into adulthood of piecing together just what that mission was all about and what it was. But it's a lot about memory and war and secrets and lies, and it's really beautiful writing.
And what else? Another one?
Oh, we can talk about either that
Should
or
we do
the
those?
Lost Words.
Yeah.
We could pull this one out, actually. This is a
Pull
really,
out.
the biggest
yeah.
one here. This is a really special book. Speaking of Robert McFarlane, The Lost Words.
And kids' books.
And kids' books, yeah.
If
I
this
mean,
is even,
I just feel like this is like story time now. You can.
book.
This is some of you might remember like 10 years ago the Oxford Junior Dictionary cut out a bunch of nature words in their children's dictionary.
Because they were
Because
they
they
were
weren't
doing
relevant,
an
you know.
updated edition.
Like
yeah.
acorn wasn't relevant, but broadband was, or something. So there was kind of this big outcry among writers, Terry Tempest Williams and Robert McFarlane, and a whole bunch of writers wrote this open letter kind of decrying that. And so now 10 years later, Robert McFarlane and the illustrator Jackie Morris, as you can see, is just amazing. I mean, these are absolutely stunning images. So they compiled a bunch of those words, and McFarlane wrote these little poems about a lot of these words that were cut out. And they put it in this deluxe, beautiful edition of a book, which I think is going to be one of these books that's here, then it just goes away, and then we don't see it again because the printing is so ornate and beautiful. But this is it's a special book. It's definitely a special book for sure.
Lineage. And it feels, I think it feels particularly special and charged to us actually because of Terry Tempest Williams' connection to it. When it was first announced that we were going to be buying the store, Steve and Kate organized this beautiful sort of culminating farewell event for them, essentially. There was a reading with Terry Tempest Williams, and also that was sort of our opportunity to stand up and wave and say, "Hi, we're the new kids." And that was just such a special evening, and one of the things that Terry talked about in her talk was she read a whole bunch of these words and sort of invoked that. And a lot of that evening felt like a charge for us. You know, this is what we're stepping into. This is the importance of this work. This is the community that's going to be here to support us. It was a really special moment. And so actually, it, I think, means a lot to us personally to now have this book to sell and say these words are important.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's obvious that if you don't have these words, you don't, and if you're a child who grows up without the word acorn, you don't know that acorns are missing, or or any of these things. Like, you need language, and that's what McFarlane, being somebody who's very much behind that kind of that charge, that mission, to make sure that we know that we are losing things, and that you have the language to articulate that is really important.
This one looks related.
Oh yeah, this one. I brought this just because I love this book. It's called Wildland, and it's this husband and wife photographer team went to all 7 continents and were basically looking for the kind of the last wild places. And I just pass it around because I don't know if you can even see it from there, but I mean the photographs themselves are stunning, just beautiful. There's this page, and I won't be able to find it now, of course, but there's a page where there's hundreds of birds circling in the sky, and you think, oh, what kind of bird is that? Maybe like a crow or something, and they're all eagles. And they just, the work that they put into this and the time that they must have spent doing this. This is another book that we speaking of our sales reps, we went to, we have an annual trade show in various places in the Bay Area, and it was in Oakland this year, and one of our sales reps found me, and he came up to me and he was like, this book, this is just take this, look at this is going to be something that you love. And of course he knew, and that's these relationships you form with your people who are in this industry. I think a lot of them for the same reasons that we are, is to find your people, and he knew. I think he was very aware that this book would be something that we would both be in love with.
And they are related ideas,
Yeah.
you know, the
They're also very
disappearance
heavy.
of some of these things. Yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
taking those ones on.
Do you sell any books that you can't stand?
No, this is being recorded.
Yeah, so
You already
I'm
called
already in
out
trouble
one
with Will
author
Self,
on
yeah.
the, We're toast.
yeah, no, it's whatever people want, right?
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah. So
People ask that sometimes, like, oh, what books do you judge if somebody's buying them? And it just doesn't feel that way. I don't know. I get excited to be selling someone a book that I love, and then otherwise I'm just happy to be selling them a book.
You're just glad that people are reading.
Don't have any.
Right.
That's not what it's for.
You brought a
Space is about.
poetry book here too, weren't you?
Poetry. I think this would be the one that Molly.
Yeah.
Well, I did brought
Well,
a
you should
poem.
talk about poetry
This year
a
I was
little
a judge for the National Book Award. I was on the
Yeah.
poetry committee. I read a lot of poetry this year, like close to 300 books of poems.
They're skinny at least.
They're skinny, yeah.
Right.
That's what I said at the beginning, and then
But intense.
300 books later.
Yeah,
it's-
right. Dense.
Stephen said to me one night, I'm tired of reading about bones.
You notice a lot of
Poets
themes
and their
throughout,
bones, yeah.
contemporary
Well, I remember
poetry.
some years ago, our dear friend, the late departed great Joanne Kiger, was a judge at a big poetry conference. And in her house, there was just stacks. I mean, a stack this big of books, this skinny is a lot of books.
Yeah.
And she was like, I'm never doing this again.
Yeah. I tried to they got to about my chest in our office above the store. It was a great experience. It was an amazing thing to kind of see what is happening at this very moment in kind of poetry in the U.S. Some amazing books of poems. This is one of my favorites from the year, which was on the short list. It didn't win. Eye Level by Jenny Xia, who is a Chinese-American poet. It's about her traveling, but the thing I loved about it the most, among all of the books of poems that are sort of personal, eye poems, and that she kind of steps back from herself in a way, in a very kind of paradoxical way that I really found unlike anything else I'd read. There are some, and that's not to say that a lot of those personal poems aren't great from other poets, but the kind of ways that she can disassociate and remove herself from her own experience and give a broader, almost like, it seems like a book of wisdom in a way, which she's young, and you read this and you think like you just have a sense of being in the world that is much wiser than your age. But that experience of being a judge was great now that it's over, and we got to go to New York, go to the gala, which was fun, and kind of be there for that.
Wear a tuxedo.
Wear a tuxedo, yeah.
That kind of thing.
But,
And you have one too from...
another poet.
Yeah, in that kind of category of, I mentioned that I tend towards prose by poets, and this is also in that category, and it's one of the books that both of us love this book, and it was probably one of the first things that we put on order when we first kind of took over the store, and we're building our own little staff favorites. And it's called Madness, Rack, and Honey by a poet named Mary Ruefle. And it's a collection of lectures. She delivered these as lectures. I would call them essays on the page. And it's just a really eclectic and beautiful collection of topics from really unique perspective. Some of the topics are on beginnings, poetry and the moon, on secrets, on fear. There's an essay that I love called Someone Reading a Book is a Sign of Order in the World. Let's see. Yeah, so and the last one is Lectures I Will Never Give, which is just kind of a list of other topics like that and a couple of thoughts on them. And it's a book that I constantly wish I was reading for the first time again, because I remember reading it and just feeling so kind of charmed and fascinated by every page and every word. But you can also really dip in and out of it and kind of pick it up as, what do I need to read about today? On fear sounds right. And it's a really unique perspective. And it's published by Wave Books, which is a small publishing house that we love.
Yeah, no, great publisher. They actually published Joanne's last book.
Yeah.
Just there too.
Yeah.
And you bought a...
Yeah, and she has one of these Mary Ruefle has one of these minds that kind of moves in these strange associative leaps that you kind of think like, I think very often we all read books and you kind of you're like, okay, I can see how you did this, or like you kind of knew that was coming with her. I feel like you never know what's coming next, and that to me is like one of the great pleasures of reading, is to experience someone else's mind in that way, beyond like writing a beautiful sentence or something. But yeah. One other one that we have here is probably, this is my favorite novel of the year, The Overstory. Richard Powers is an amazing novelist, formerly very inventive. This is about a group of people who come together over a threatened stand of trees. I mean, the bookstore has a section of books about trees, so when this novel came out, we were like, oh, this is perfect for us. Really great novel. I'm reading it right now. Yeah, he's very good. He's always been very interesting formally, but I think this book, to me, feels like the most emotionally kind of honest and true account of people and their relationship to each other and to nature. Yeah, just a lovely book. Yeah.
We go through all of them?
We got one more.
Okay.
I grabbed this just because, well, because I like it, but because the cover is so good. It feels like a kind of arts and crafts kind of cover. This was written by a guy who was a archaeologist who worked for the BBC on a documentary series about life on a farm in the 17th century. And then that series was successful and they moved to the next century. But they did everything as they would do it during that time. So, he had to learn how to, build a hedgerow and, cut grass using the proper tools and things. So this is his book. It's as much a philosophical sort of attempt to understand what craft means and how it means for our bodies and our minds to be engaged as it is. Like there are some pointers on how to build a hedgerow. I don't need that personally, but I was interested in learning that, that it is like there's a sort of embodiment, as I said earlier, about like a book as a physical thing. I think working with our bodies is important, especially as we become more and more digital. And books that kind of lead you beyond just the book itself. Like I always think of the book as a kind of a conduit to other things. It's it is literally a door that you open up and you can enter into. But then like you also have to exit the other side and go out into the world. And if you can be armed with a better sense or some refreshed sense of your place in the world and some new idea of how to be in a place. That's important to me, and I think through our kind of curation at the bookstore, something we care about a lot.
So I imagine time is a great, for everybody, it's our biggest constraint and value. So, to figure this out, what you're going to carry, but also just personally, you're still readers. So, my problem for a long time, it took me well into adulthood to realize that I could actually quit a book without finishing it partway through, that I wasn't committed after the first 50 or 100 pages. I could go to something else because there's just so many that you might want to read. So, how do you guys are looking at reading for pleasure too, but how do you pick,
Whatever
I got
the latest book that came in, the one that's in my hand is
yeah. Right. I do think we have to, and it's particularly Stephen being the buyer for the store is definitely kind of has that pressure to read for the store and to read. Yeah.
And we know a lot of people. We know people. We have friends in publishing, and we have editors who are friends and writers who are friends. So you have that obligation there too to kind of honestly engage with their work. Yeah, which often once you're, it doesn't feel like an obligation once we're reading and loving the book. But sometimes we do have to remind each other. Like, it's okay to read something that is, older or not going to be some, exciting new seller. And if it's something that's been sitting on our shelf for a little while, let's give ourselves a minute to read it,
Well, I imagine, the last Sunday's was, the New York Times Book Review was the best of the year. Yeah. You immediately get any of these if you don't have them already, right? Yeah. Because people, if something like this comes out, do people come in asking for them?
Yeah, certainly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You also get pretty good at describing. We aren't lying to anyone or trying to be disingenuous, but I think we're pretty comfortable talking about books we haven't read because you just kind of have to throughout the day in the store. So I'll never straight up lie and say to somebody, I read that and I highly recommend it, but you can kind of engage.
It's got a black and white cover.
Things.
You'll really like it.
It's about this thick. It's a rectangle, and
paperback.
some people like this rectangle.
It's in paperback now. Yeah.
Well, and also all of our other book selling friends. We have a lot of friends, both still at Green Apple, at City Lights, and various places in the East Bay. We see each other a lot. We talk, we communicate, and if someone whose taste I trust says they loved this book, then I sort of rely on that as an extension of me as a bookseller saying to a customer that, I can say, well, Brad at East Bay Booksellers, someone who also recently bought, it was Diesel Bookstore before on Rockridge. He was an employee there and bought that from the original owners a little after we took over. So he's someone, too, that I feel like people whose taste you trust. And, there's a network of kind of, we talk on Twitter or we email. And
So speaking of taste you trust, here's the hardest question I have for you.
I'll let Molly answer this one.
No, you both have to. It's for both of you. So desert island time, you're going off and you have access, but you can only take books from 3 authors, period. Don't think too hard, but that's it for the rest of your life. You can only read 3 authors.
Books from 3 authors.
You can only read 3 authors for the rest of your life. Who are they?
Well, a couple of years ago, we organized a Moby Dick marathon reading in San Francisco, which was a 28-hour overnight affair. So I would bring Moby Dick. That's an easy one. But that means I could bring all the other Melville.
Yeah, that's
I don't know if I'd want to read other Melville besides Moby Dick, but okay, Moby Dick. I would bring.
Yeah, so the category is authors, so we can have
authors.
access to. Okay.
I wasn't going to make you just bring 3 books.
Yeah,
So
thank
you.
you.
Can do 3. Yeah, I was trying to be cool.
Any wiggle room we can get.
Yeah.
Trying to be nice about it, but that's.
This is when we just sit here for 20 minutes.
Who jumps? Yeah, no, you got to see. If it doesn't jump to mind, you can't do it because you'll get stuck.
Yeah,
so
I mean, I would
like 3.
I think I could spend a desert island amount of time with Emily Dickinson. Just fascinated and not, you could never get to the bottom of it. Kind of similar to Moby Dick. So she's on the list for me.
That's one each.
I'll also say Joseph Conrad. I really love Joseph Conrad.
You're really not giving yourself. You're on the desert island, and you're like gonna be, also seafaring and struggling. And
I'm leaning in. I'm leaning in.
Up the river. Yeah.
No escapism for the.
And then like Shel Silverstein. I don't know. Maybe would that be a good answer?
Yeah, there you go.
Is a kid with us? That's the thing we need to know.
I imagine. He gets his own choice later. Okay? That's all right. I do have the Moby Dick. I read it finally because I was always at that reading. Yeah, the kids one. It's just one word per page. It was really great.
Whale.
Too hard, huh?
That's a nice way to think about it, actually, though. Like, what would be that kind of childlike break from your desert island serious reading? I could go back into everything by Roald Dahl. I read all of those when I was a kid, so that could be a good thing to revisit on an island.
I think you each got one more?
I each got one more.
Oh boy. Well, it's fresh in mind because I didn't read it as a kid, and I was like a huge Arthurian nerd, but I recently read T.H. White's Once and Future King, the whole set, and I was amazed at how good they were and how rich the writing was, both about people and about the natural world. I just feel like, in some ways, I think the books find you at the right time. Sometimes you just kind of stumble into them, and you're fortunate in that way. I think maybe if I read them as a kid, a lot of it would have gone over my head. I'm sure I would have gotten something else out of it, but reading it as an adult, like soon to be parent, I felt like, oh, this is like the perfect time. I don't know how I'd feel reading it again if I was stuck with it forever on a desert island. But I'm just going to say that to put all the pressure on Molly to finish hers.
I'll give her another moment to think. So, I mean, I'm wondering, that's the exact experience you were just mentioning, that I've had a lot of reading a book when I'm a teenager or 20, you really get into it, and then you come back to it and you read it again, and it's a real letdown.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just the right time and place.
Yeah. And I really, truly do believe that a lot of books just kind of find you at the right time, or you find them, and that's sort of one of the pleasures I think of browsing in a bookstore that you don't get if you're buying a book online, is that sense of discovery. That something at that moment is, and I don't mean this in like a mystical kind of way, but there's something about that moment that the spine of this book or the cover of this book is just like attracts your attention in a way, and that happens often enough that I feel pretty confident in thinking that.
That's why it's an entire a big important part of publishing is the cover.
Yeah.
The people, they have in whole departments that just do the
Just
covers.
the covers, yeah.
And then when they go paperback, they do a whole nother,
Yeah.
right?
Although I believe, because most books, most of a book's life is going to be like this on a shelf, so I feel like spines are more important than covers.
Yeah, right.
But, yeah.
All right, what'd you come up with?
Well, I'm gonna not overthink it and just name another favorite writer who I haven't mentioned yet, which is Angela Carter. She was a British writer in, let's see, when did she pass away? It would have been like the early 90s or something. So she was sort of
She died relatively young.
last century. She's probably best known for her collection of short stories, The Bloody Chamber, which are sort of dark, interesting reimaginings of fairy tales that make kind of twist things with
a feminist, definitely
definitely
very strong
through a
feminist
feminist lens, and twist things with gender and things like that. So a lot of people know her for that, but then she also, all of her novels are magical and incredibly well written and kind of go in really different directions. One is very Shakespearean in its themes. One is about a circus, and just any world that she dreamt up was one that I would want to stay in for a while.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And she was very funny and kind of scabrous and
it's a real character.
Yeah, very much so. Of the generation of Salman Rushdie, but she died of cancer very young, like in her early 50s, I think. So it was a big loss when she.
I think she's sort of a writer's writer. She's often like referenced by other writers, or kind of a favorite of kind of that community. Yeah.
Did you guys name any living writers? I don't think so.
Nope.
No.
Whoops.
True readers of going way back.
No,
Right.
Yeah, Will Self.
Trying to damage control. Yeah.
Well, I will say
That's
one
funny,
other,
because we read so much contemporary
so
stuff, but we all, for Desert Island, we went back to the.
Right.
It can be hard. I mean, that's one of the things about bookselling too, and this constant sense of trying to keep up with what's new, is that you lose sight of everything that's come before that in some ways, and so you're constantly, and it's hard to get a handle, like a book that you love that was published in 2018, is that book gonna last? And it's, sometimes it can be a fluke, or sometimes it's because a book, it might not even book that anyone pays attention to in 2018, but then 30 years later, it's realized that it was ahead of its time, or that it really spoke of our time. So that's like the other interesting part of curating a bookstore, is trying to constantly negotiate between things that are kind of established classics, things that we love that aren't classics by any means, but that kind of have some place, and then all these new books that that have this immediate. A book comes out and 3 months later, it's like people forget about it in a lot of cases, and that can be more of the dispiriting part. But the fun part of being a bookseller is that we are very actively involved in keeping those books front and center in a lot of ways. So sorry, living writers.
Yes, all right. I won't tell Danielle Steele you said that. So we have a few minutes left if people want to ask questions and talk some more about anything related to anything we've talked about here today. Anybody read any good books lately?
I'm just curious about your friends who are opening the bookstore in Providence.
Mm-hmm.
And Providence has Brown and Risby, and it's university town. Are they doing okay? You think they'll do okay?
They are doing okay, yeah. They opened a bookstore / bar, so they have,
They went the route where they picked another item with a higher markup.
There's a thought.
And if they're not doing okay, they can wash away their sorrows. But one of the two, it's a couple who got married last summer, actually, and we know them. One of the two worked for New Directions Publishing for years, and he worked at McNally Jackson, which is an amazing bookstore in Manhattan. So he knows what he's doing, and his partner, Emma, went to Brown, so she knows that community, and she's a translator. I think they're going to be fine. It's just kind of, they have to kind of settle, and you have to give it time, and you hope that you kind of have to bide your time with rent, and you make sure things kind of progress in the way that you want, which we didn't really have to deal with so much because the store was there, and people knew it already.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to mention, actually, I know I have a couple of friends, who've gotten into, besides you guys have gone into the business too, and the one complaint they've had is they've felt really compelled, they've had to branch into a lot of non-book items too. The swag, all the stuff related, and music maybe too, whatever it is, clothing, related to books too, and while, in order to keep the place afloat, that people buy that more, but you guys don't seem to have that much of that. You got nice t-shirts.
We got nice t-shirts, yeah. We don't do much of that.
We're very picky about those kinds of, they're called sidelines. Those little gifty things that, and we have them, but we try to keep them fitting within kind of the aesthetic and sensibility of the other things we have.
We're so dedicated to books in a small store that it feels like to lose a case that could be books to socks or something that a lot of bookstores sell. It just doesn't. And you can get that elsewhere in Point Reyes, of course, And we're like one of the, in a kind of a resort town where, prices can be marked up. Like books, by contrast, even if they are pricey, we can't mark books up. Books come with a price printed on them for the most part. So in certain situations, that can be a plus.
Yeah, somebody gave me a Hemingway corkscrew that I kind of liked, but that was, So.
Yeah, some of that stuff is cool.
You mentioned that on one side there's this great bakery, on the other side there's another store. So what would and we talked about size. What would happen if suddenly the store on the other side became available to rent? What would be going through your minds?
God, I hope it's not another bookstore.
What would be going through your minds in terms of possibly a expansion?
Yeah. Well, we actually recently did an interview for a website called The Literary Hub, where one of their questions, they do a series called Interview with a Bookstore. And as you can tell, we like to talk about books, so it's pretty long. And it went up a couple of weeks ago. One of their questions was like, what would you do with infinite space? And a lot of bookstore people will say like a bar or a restaurant or something. My answer, and I think it's an honest answer, is that I really like, first of all, we're in a building that's 120 years old, and it's on the fault. So, like, I don't want to mess with anything. We don't want to mess with it.
Yeah. We don't want to go knocking down walls. And
whatever dust is holding that place together, don't want to touch it. But, I mean, I don't know. It would be tempting for sure to have an additional space. And I think one of the things that I think the book selection is fine as is, because I'm doing most of that buying myself, that part is on me. And to double that would be double the work. I think one of the great things would be, we have various places in town, and we've done an event here, and to do events and where people can gather, because it's a small space. Like, I think a place that could be more of a gathering spot for events and things, or just kind of a place to hang out, would feel really nice. But I'm sure eventually, if that did happen, and we moved in or expanded, more and more books would start to fill the space, like our home,
Yeah, but that would make sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. Cableing's great neighbors, though.
Yeah.
We don't, we're happy. Yeah, it's nice to feel kind of contented with the space that we have. And early on, we joked at the very beginning about like cutting a hole in the wall between us and the bakery so that we could just reach through and get our morning buns. And then someone came in to the store pretty early and said, I heard a rumor that you're going to have a little window. And I was like, okay, no more joking about that.
Small town.
It's going to get back to the landlord. We're going to have to, what are you doing?
Selling booze out the back,
Yeah. So let it be known, no plans to expand anytime soon.
Yes.
Do you have recommendations for those of us with nieces and grandchildren around ages 11 and 12, and if we
hypothetically speaking,
if we wanted to ship off that book, do you do that, or do you send us to the post office?
No, we do. We mail books.
Yep.
Yeah.
And on the website we have lists of recommendations, but also in the store. That was another section that we moved it to the back of the store, and kind of the back wall now is just this. There's so many amazing children's books right now. The art is incredible, as you can see from this one, the Lost Words. It's kind of like a renaissance for children's book publishing. So that part is fun, and middle grade, like 11 and 12, kind of middle grade young adult reading. That's an interesting age too.
Yes.
Because they're kind of transitioning to reading more kind of adult material, but it's in that nebulous place.
So yeah, in the store we have some of our recommendations for that. But a lot of them are things that we and the other people who work in the store read when we were young, but we also have, you know, there's some really great, just like, I think it seems like there's a lot of awareness of centering, you know, strong female characters in books for that age group and kind of stories that break out of some of the usual tropes that are around. So there's a lot of those that we have on display and stuff too.
Question?
When Kate and I decided to sell the store and initiated this process, which Molly and Steve referred to, when we received their letter, we immediately knew that they were the stewards. And they had this passion and this spirit, and unlike Kate and I, had a deep knowledge of books. They've become beloved friends over the last 2 years. And I'm so deeply grateful for their presence and their incredible gifts that they brought to this community. And I also I want to recognize the fact that they didn't have any money when they...
Can't be emphasized enough.
And I just wanted to, there's a few people in this room that stepped up and helped them make this dream a reality. And I just want to acknowledge them in the room. So, yeah. Thanks.
So there's a testimony from Steve number 1. So I think that's the perfect conclusion here. So thank you all very much, and thank you both for being here.
For coming.
I should say, are these books all for sale?
I will always sell a book.
Yes, I thought so.
Anytime.
It was an
Meet me at the Volvo.
It was an obvious. No, but and you have some more too, I think.
We have
Yeah. So
extra
out
copies
here,
of these.
two.
I
You
think they're
want
just
to?
in the box, but we could do it
Yeah.
wherever. If anybody,
Well, wherever you wish. I
Yeah.
mean, if you have books are for sale if you wish. So, and thank you all very much again. We do accept whatever donations you want to give for doing these talks, but please do feel free to conduct some commerce if you wish. We don't oppose that at all here.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you guys very much.